And Jack Romberg joins us now. Jack, thank you so much for taking some time out to be with us on Shalom TV.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I was telling the audience before you came on that I read your piece and it touched me, Jack. I was very impressed with the compassion. I was very impressed with the friendship you have with Professor Ahmed. And at the same time, as I think you were told, I was also surprised by what I felt was an attempt on your part and on Ahmed's part to draw a moral equivalency between Hamas and the State of Israel. And I want to put up on the screen a piece of what you wrote, and then I'd love to hear you discuss it. But this is what Jack wrote. He wrote, even as we might have some disagreement on the details, meaning he and his Palestinian partner, the Muslim partner, or in parsing the conflict, we find that we share the same hopes, ideals, and values. We both must wrestle with some inconvenient truths. And he goes on to write, whether the blood spilled is Israeli or Palestinian, it is red. Responsibility for spilling that blood, is on the hands of both Israel and Hamas. So, Jack, I want to understand, are you suggesting the moral responsibility for the shedding of blood in this Israel-Hamas conflict? Are you arguing that the responsibility is equal and that there is a moral equivalency in your mind between Israel on the one hand and Hamas on the other?
No, I am not at all trying to argue that there's a moral equivalency between the two. The difficulty in, of course, putting together a piece that's going to be speaking not just on the Huffington Post, but also speaking to both of our communities, is to try and find some common language and some common things. But I in no way have a sense that there's a moral equivalency between Hamas and the State of Israel. We were simply trying to convey that there is no difference between the shedding of blood, be it Israeli blood or Palestinian blood, that it is tragic when civilian Palestinian blood is shed, and it is tragic when Israeli blood is shed. But in no way was I endorsing or trying to endorse some kind of a moral equivalency between Hamas and the State of Israel. I understand very clearly, and I write about it. You know, I've been writing about it rather frequently in the last couple weeks on my personal blog for the congregation, that Hamas reflects a very deep hatred of Jews, not just about the State of Israel, but a hatred of Jews. And by the way, my friend Parvez understands that as well. But as I said, we were putting together a piece that was going to speak to his community, to my community, and trying to find language that would convey our deep sense of sorrow over the shedding of blood, and our desire that the cycle of violence would somehow come to a close.
Bowie, I appreciate what you just described is so honest. And I imagine myself sitting with a very good Muslim friend, and now trying to write a piece that would, as you say, appeal to and touch and move both a Jewish reader and a Muslim reader. The reality, however, is, and I don't know how this happened, Jack, you ended up publishing your piece on the Huffington Post. This had nothing to do now with your congregation or with any community that your Muslim friend is involved with. And I'm going to put up another paragraph. And again, I want you to clarify, although I think I understand now I understand the dilemma you had, and the question is, in retrospect, do you feel you handled the dilemma properly, or are you either unwittingly, and I think it's unwittingly, did you unwittingly mislead your audience? Here's something else you wrote. You wrote that despite our obvious deep connections to different sides in this conflict, we both are appalled by the never-ending cycle of violence. We are both tired of narratives that cast one side as good and the other side is evil. And you also wrote, most importantly, both sides need to not cheer the death and destruction of the other. So, Jack, are you suggesting that Israelis cheer the death and destruction of Palestinians?
I have read certainly articles, and I have read pieces by certain elements in the Jewish community that, frankly, are appalling in terms of their lack of regard for the value of Palestinian blood.
I don't know what you mean. Give me an example, because I can give you I can give you myriad examples of how the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian people, rejoice every time 3 Israeli teens are kidnapped and killed and candy is handed out. Have you ever heard of Jews handing out candy and rejoicing when some Palestinian dies?
No,
have you ever heard of that?
Of course not. But,
no, don't say that's not fair.
You do have the current descendants of the Koch party and so forth that are proposing some things that are pretty, off the deep end.
I don't know. I don't know what you mean, but I know this: the Koch party, which doesn't even exist anymore.
Right. I'm talking about the descendants of that.
Okay, but they don't. What you're doing is you're equating in the Huffington Post what a small lunatic fringe, and you and I would call them lunatic without any problem. There's a lunatic fringe in every community. There's a lunatic fringe in the Jewish world. You're equating a lunatic fringe with mainstream Palestinian Authority perspective. The Palestinian Authority has on its website cartoons mocking the death of the 3 Israeli teens who were kidnapped and slaughtered. And what you have in the Jewish world is the state of Israel giving the family of the Palestinian child, the teenager who was killed by lunatic Israelis, the same kind of economic victim of terrorism status that Jews have been given. The difference between the way the state of Israel handles the crazies in our society and the way the Palestinians lionize those who are killing Jews is so radically different. It is astounding to me that you want to say in the Huffington Post that both sides, Israel as well as the Palestinians, rejoice at the death of Palestinians. Jack, I can't believe you mean it.
Well, again, I don't draw a moral equivalency between the two sides. I don't draw a moral equivalency between Hamas and Israel. That is never what I would never, ever agree to that, and I would never endorse any kind of moral equivalency between the two sides. But, when you talk to people and you talk to Jews and you talk to some people, even locally, and you get comments of, they should, just kill them all, or they should just bombard them all. And
who says, Jack?
Perhaps
who
it's
said?
a reflection of a couple of private conversations. And yes, I certainly understand what you're saying. Is that now it comes out there and it looks as a moral equivalency. But
on the Huffington Post,
that's certainly
no less.
not what I would endorse.
Okay. All right, I want to put something else up here. One more quote that you, and let's see what this meant. Do you have the next one? Yeah. Let us recognize that by perpetuating the blockade of Gaza, in essence creating a large open-air prison, Israel has created a situation that breeds violence. Jack, are you suggesting, first of all, that Israel has created a prison in Gaza?
Whether or not Israel felt it had good cause, and I'm sure that the government of Israel felt it had very good cause for enacting the blockade, the fact is that we have to deal with the consequence of the blockade. And the consequences of the blockade are a couple. One is it failed. It did not prevent missiles and weapons from getting into Gaza, so we are stuck with the situation we have. And because it failed, the consequences of the economic impact on the citizens of Gaza, on the average Palestinian, is just horrendous. So the ability of Palestinians in Gaza often to get basic things, and again, we can go back and forth as to, and I would agree that Hamas's stand and their attitude and their actions is the driver behind the sequence of events, but I also think that we have to grapple with the reality that the blockade has been devastating to the average citizen in Gaza.
Why is Israel blockading Gaza at all, Jack?
Well, the blockade was enacted to try and prevent weapons, from coming into Gaza to be used by Hamas, and clearly that has not clearly that failed. It did not come to be that they were able to prevent the weapons from going in. So the only result is not that Hamas didn't get armed, but just that the Palestinian citizens have suffered.
Well, Jack, neither you nor I know how many arms would have come into Gaza if there was no blockade. You're right that by the way, in the end, they were able to smuggle rockets in, maybe through the Egyptian border. But no matter how many rockets they had, they would have had many, many, many more if there was no blockade. There was a whole question as to whether Israel should or should not be preventing certain kinds of cement entering Gaza. They were convinced finally that it was going to be used for peaceful purposes, to build hospitals and to build schools and to build housing. And now we know it was used to build this elaborate tunnel network.
Yeah, but can I point something out about the timing of all of this? And I kind of thought this might come up, and we probably would have put something a little bit different in the article if it would have been written even a day or two later.
I understand.
Because we did not have the information when we actually wrote the piece and started to put it out about the extent of the tunnels and what had been discovered about the tunnels and so forth. So we're sort of talking about something where we had certain pieces of information put together a piece that was really simply meant to be a Jew and a Muslim who are very close friends, to put out a statement that people could read to say, look, here are two people who in essence are connected to different sides of the conflict, both of whom are trying to find a common language, a common something to bridge a divide, to form a vision for what happens when the conflict is done. That really is it in a nutshell.
Okay, and I want to make it clear once again, because although I am challenging some of the things you say,
right,
I was moved by your piece, and I will ask anybody here to read it. It's still available on the Huffington Post. And what I liked about the piece was there was a clear, I hope I'm not reading more into it than I should. I felt there was a profound friendship here, which suggested to the reader, suggested to me, that if the world were filled with, you and your Muslim friend, if the world were full of you, there would be no conflict. And that's what moved me. At the same time, while I can't say proud, I don't know you enough to be proud of you. I was very impressed. But at the same time that I was impressed, I said this to myself. Here's a very idealistic guy. He happens to be a rabbi. I believe it's because you're a human being. You're a very lovely human being who wanted to say something conciliatory and to put your arm around a Muslim and say, here you've got a Jew and a Muslim, and we want to live together and work this out. At the same time, what you ended up doing was terribly critical for the state of Israel, because what your piece does in every single paragraph is equate Israel with Gaza in terms of Israel and Hamas. And it's not, by the way, it's not about Israel and the Palestinians. You go so far as to say it's between Israel and Hamas. And I want to read one more piece for you, because I'm very glad you have a chance to respond. The comment you made a moment ago about how you wrote it before the tunnels is a very important and very real piece. But I want to read one more line here, because again, I want to know whether this is what you mean. Both of us believe, you write, that peace will come to the Middle East only when All sides love their own more than they hate their adversaries. Jack, do you believe Israelis hate Palestinians more than they love fellow Israelis?
No.
Then why do you say
that
it
was
as
that was absolutely a piece to try and again just kind of create a sense of focus. You know, do what's right for ourselves, do what's right for for our own people, and stop the hatred. And as I've said, you know, when you're doing a piece with somebody else, you do a lot of back and forth, and you do a lot of word parsing, and that's what we're coming down to, is we're parsing words.
No, we're
but
not.
I have to point out things that you didn't say that are in the piece, which people should read, which is that a piece that a Muslim friend of mine has signed on to condemns Hamas, points out the use of civilians as human shields, points out that they have completely failed, that they were given the chance upon being elected to rule in Hamas. They were given the chance with some infrastructure and some tools to create something positive, and that they have failed completely. And I think that to have, if we're looking at it as Jews, that and supporters of Israel, that if we have a Muslim agreeing with those statements, that's a huge accomplishment.
You're you're right. It's an enormous strength of your piece. And the only thing I'm saying to you is, it came at a cost that I don't believe is honest for you. Because what you had to do to write this piece that condemned Hamas appropriately was to also slam Israel, as if everything Hamas does, Israel does also. That's what your piece says, including the fact not that Palestinians have to learn to love their children more than they hate us, but Jews have to learn the same thing. Israelis have to learn the same thing. And you didn't mean that. And your entire piece is riddled with concessions you make as if Israel is no less guilty than Hamas. And in this instance, and we just had Ari Shavit on, and in 1 second I'm going to play this little clip. Ari Shavit, who wrote My Promised Land, he is perhaps he's the leading author right now in the Jewish world. He's a major journalist, one of the major journalists in Israel. He writes for Haaretz. He was on Shalom TV last week. And in fact, what we'll do is we're going to play for you. It's about, 20, 30 seconds. I want you to hear what Ari Shavit says about whether this is a black and white situation, good and evil. And you and I know, Jack, there are very few things in life that are black and white, good and evil. Here's what how Ari Shavit describes not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but the Israeli-Hamas conflict. Let's play that. In this instance, is it black and white for Ari Shavit?
Well, again, it's important for me. It is in one way, but it is important for me to make the distinction. So in a day like today, when 15 people died in this school, this UNRWA school, and in these days, when hundreds of Palestinians get killed, among them women and children, I feel for them. I cannot turn my eyes away from that. My heart goes out to the victims of this horrible violence, of this horrible tragedy. And my empathy is, I have deep empathy to the Palestinian people. But I make a very clear distinction. The Palestinians themselves are the victims of this evil regime. So when it comes to the conflict between the Israeli democracy and this fascist religious organization called Hamas, it is black and white.
And that to me is how I see it, Jack, that in this particular instance, it's black and white, and what your piece does in a valiant effort to show a certain kind of common unity here between Muslim and Jew, between, in essence, Palestinian and Jew. What you did was you trivialized the state of Israel and tried to describe the Jewish people and the state of Israel as if they are no different than Hamas. And as I talk to you, that's clearly not what you were aiming to do.
No, it's not what I was aiming to do. The only thing that I will add is, and I know that you are a rabbi as well, so you've studied the tradition as certainly as much as I have, that you know that the concept of a hate isn't necessarily one in which you intend a wrong, but yet a wrong happens. And I would be the first one to say that certainly Israel does not intend to be murdering Palestinians. That's an unintended consequence from something that they're forced into. However, I would also add that because there is not an intent, it doesn't absolve us of responsibility. And we still have to look at ourselves and our actions and the things that lead up to the situation and determine, did we have a hand because of something we missed or something we didn't do? Did we have a hand in creating the situation, even if there was no intent on us? And there is where the moral equivalence or the moral inequivalence is so obvious, and that it is the intent of Hamas to destroy Israel. It is not the intent of Israel to destroy the Palestinians. However, because of unintended actions or unintended consequences of actions, as a Jew, as a rabbi, as somebody who deeply loves Israel and has been there many times and has lived there for a year and feels deep connections to Israel, I grieve over the fact that we do have to examine what part of it is our responsibility.
Look, I want to choose my words well. On the one hand, I don't disagree with the concept that you just articulated. I think you and I would disagree about whether intent is a factor that is taken into account by the Jewish tradition. I believe, although actions are ultimately the determining factor, kavanah, intent, and accident do play a very strong part in the way halachic decisions are formulated in Talmudic literature. Number two, while I believe no country, not America, not Israel, is free of, quote, hate, free of sin, the qualitative hate that is being inflicted upon Israel is in no way similar to the hate that may be inflicted at times, intended or not, by the state of Israel. And once again, my only quarrel with anything you've written or said is not in the essence, and that's again why your piece moved me. The only thing I think you went in an attempt to put your arm around a friend, that you went much, much too far, and you did it again in your last comment. You went much too far in suggesting that there's enough hate to go around and that Israel has as much hate to it as Hamas. There is an enormous,
but a hate is not necessarily
difference.
A sin. A hate is an action that can be an action that just went wrong. And if you are defining hate as sin, then I do apply the sin to Hamas's anti-Semitism and the hatred and the way they abuse their own citizens. In terms of using the word hate for Israel is simply as an action that did not intend wrong, but went wrong, and so there are consequences that have to be dealt with.
I appreciate it. I'm only asking you one last time. Are you suggesting that the level of hate, no matter how you define hate, is equivalent between Hamas and Israel?
No.
Okay, that's all.
No,
okay.
Not at all.
By the way, I give you enormous credit. You wrote a very wonderful piece in its larger sense. Here I am nitpicking with you, but I'm nitpicking because I think it's important. But you also came on and were willing to discuss this with me. And I really hope one day I get to meet you in person. You sound like a very lovely, thoughtful person. And maybe there are situations when I will turn to you for insight on Shalom TV that doesn't necessarily deal with a political piece about Israel and the Palestinians. I thank you very, very much for making yourself available to me.
My pleasure, Mark, and thank you for calling.
Thank you. You be well.